Hey everybody, today I'm going to talk to you about gamification, and why video games are addicting and your course is not. My name's Ryan Higley, and I'm the Senior Graphic Designer at the Center for Creative Leadership. But in other parts of my career, I've been an instructional designer in higher education, and an instructor in the classroom, with both hybrid and online courses. Now, normally these gamification type seminars would start with the presenter talking about their love of video games, starting when they were a kid with the Atari 2600, playing in their jammies on Saturday morning before their parents woke up, moving on to buying the first SNES in the neighborhood with some of their paper route money, and finally playing Destiny online with their college buddies, making sure to be quiet so the kids don't wake up. And really, that is my background. I mean, look at me. I'm a 34-year-old white male who lives in the United States. I am so dead center in the middle of that video game demographic that if this wasn't my background, that would be the odd thing. Now, before we get into video games and what they can teach us in education, let's just look at video games in general and give some statistics so that we have some context for it. Now, video games are popular. How popular are they? Well, 155 million Americans play video games. That's about 60% of the population. And if we look worldwide, 1.2 billion video game players out there. And 800 million of those gamers are playing their games online. That's going to be important for later. The demographic split between video game players is pretty even nowadays, 52-48 male to female. And actually, watching people play video games has become more popular than ever, with Major League Gaming having a banner year last year, with League of Legends topping the charts, with 11.2 million concurrent unique users watching their finals in South Korea. Here's a shot of the 40,000 people that showed up to the stadium to watch those finals. Now, YouTube is another big popular area to watch video games, and video games account for 3.5 billion views per month. In fact, the most popular YouTube channel, can you guess it? It's PewDiePie. He's a UK video game reviewer. He has 40 million subscribers. So video games are popular, but video games are also really profitable. Let's look at how much. Video games made $94 billion last year. Look at that compared to music. They surpassed music in 2007. And they passed movies in 2009. If you combine music and movies, that's barely half of what video games make. And one of the reasons for that is that more video games are going onto mobile. And in fact, mobile revenue will surpass console revenue, maybe this year, but definitely next year for sure. And two of the biggest media acquisitions of 2014 happened within video games. Amazon bought Twitch, which is a streaming video game platform, for $1 billion. And Microsoft bought the juggernaut of Minecraft for $2.5 billion. And in fact, only basically one person created Minecraft. His name is Notch, and he took away a majority of that $2.5 billion. He then went to basically retire from video games, bought the most expensive house in Beverly Hills at $70 million. Here's a picture he tweeted out of his $200,000 candy room. Are you jealous? I know I am. I love candy. So we know that video games are popular. We know that video games are profitable. But how does that help us in education? Well, I'm going to get to that. But first, I want to talk about the rise in popularity of video games and how that wasn't a gradual thing. Video games have been, in the popularity of them, had been rising gradually since the 80s and 90s. But really, there were two very significant spikes in video game, not only popularity, but profitability. Let's look at those two. First one happened in 2007 and went for a few years, and that's when video games first went online. That's when the Xbox 360 came out, the PlayStation 3. That's when Xbox Live and PlayStation Network started up, and also Steam. Now, the second spike is where we're in right now, 2013 to now. And again, this is where video games went online, but in a different way. This is where video games started to be on mobile phones, on tablets, free-to-play games, freemium games, social games, games like that required you to be online to play them. So why is that a big deal? Well, the reason that video games became so popular at those times It might be that video games went online and you were able to play with your friends, or that you were able to download video games easier, or there were different price points. You didn't have to pay $60 for them. You could pay 99 cents or be free to play. But if you talk to a lot of researchers and you talk to video game developers, one of the big assets that they got from video games going online were the data points that their users were sending back to them, so that video game developers could really tweak the experiences and make them as engaging and motivating to players as possible. You know, video games are one of the first entertainment mediums in the history of the world that gives real-time feedback from every single one of their users on every single one of their interactions. Let's look at some of those data points that developers get back. We're talking about retention, success rates, failure rates, session length, abandonment, frequency of return, and these are just a handful of the thousands that video game developers get to work with to make their games truly engaging. Here's a quote from David Housen, who's a developer of a video game called Two Dots. It's a mobile game. He says, in the last 7 days, 100 million Two Dots games were played. And out of those 100 million games, 1/3 of them took place on level 30. Now, something's wrong with level 30, right? Players are getting stuck. In the old days, David Housen would have to wait until 2 Dots 2 came out, or probably 3 Dots, that's a better sequel name. But now he doesn't have to. The team went in, looked at level 30, made some tweaks, made level 30 a little bit easier, gave their players a little bit more reward for beating level 30, probably made lots of different tweaks, put out a patch, and now gamers are sailing past level 30. There's no plateaus anymore. You can see how these data points are really helpful for video game developers to make the most engaging games that they can. Now, that hasn't always been the case. Let's look at a game that came out in 1994. It was a Japanese arcade game called Puzzle Bobble. It was a sequel to Bubble Bobble, which was probably more popular. But we're going to look at a win state. And now a win state is when you beat a level in a game, and this is the reward that you're giving to your players. If we're talking about a carrot and stick equation, the carrot is the reward that you're getting, while the stick is the challenge of the game. Now, remember that these Japanese arcade developers didn't have any of this data to work with. So let's see how they deal with win states. So you can see there's a little bit of feedback here. We get a point score, we get how much time it took me to beat it, and the guys at the bottom do a little dance. But really that's it. And you know, this was typical of games of this time period. It was mostly stick that we're talking about. There was almost no carrot. The challenge of the game is what kept gamers going through the experience. Now, let's look at a different game, a more modern game within the same genre called Peggle. And actually we're going to be looking at Peggle 2. And let's look at their win state and see if we can see any differences. I think you'll catch it. I think you can see that there's quite a difference there. There's so much more carrot in this equation. Now, I'm not saying that educational gamification needs to be this in your face. Peggle 2 is entertainment. It needs to be turned up to 11. But if we're talking about educational win states, if Peggle 2 is 11, then educational win states are like 0. I'm going to give an example that the team at Purdue, working on their passport badging system, did at a EDUCAUSE seminar a few years ago. And that's showing you an educational win state called the transcript. So here's my transcript. And specifically, here's a class that I took. Now, this is really my win state for this class, right? This is 4 months of my life. 4 months of my life that went into this general anatomy class. That's hours of study time and lecture time. This is drawings and papers that I wrote and group projects. This is countless sleepless nights and studying, all for a B. That pixelated B here on the screen is my win state. Now, I know that education should be a reward in and of itself, but when you're trying to compete with Peggle 2 and Beethoven's Ode to Joy playing after winning a 2-minute level, that's going to be a tough challenge. So video game developers have really used a lot of psychological devices to make their games really compelling and engaging to their users. So let's look at some of those psychological devices. Now, I don't want this to take 2 hours, so I'm going to focus on one that I feel is really important, and it deals with motivation. And you might have heard of it before, especially in education, but self-determination theory is a psychological theory that is used in a lot of different aspects of our lives when it comes to motivation. Work, religion, sports, games, all of those things use this. And it shows why humans are motivated to do something. So let's look at the first element of it. And really there are only 3. The first one is autonomy. People are motivated when they have a sense of control. And you can see how video games are great at this. A lot of open world games don't have a linear storyline that you follow. They let you explore. We talked about Minecraft before. Does that have characters really? Does that have a storyline that you need to follow? No. It's a big open world. It gives players a lot of autonomy. The second one is competence. Competence is when people are motivated when they feel competent, or when they see that they can at least see themselves mastering a task. Another psychological element of this is something that's called scaffolding, and you might have heard that in education. That's when you prop up a user when they're learning something new. Video games might do this with a hint system or visual feedback when you're learning something new about a game. The third thing is relatedness. And this is people feel motivated when they're connected with other people. And I don't even think I need to explain to you how great video games are at this. One of the reasons that Amazon bought Twitch is because of the community behind it. It's not just playing video games or watching people play video games. It's being able to interact in the chat while they're doing it live. So one of the reasons that video games has become so popular is game developers have used these psychological hooks to make their games really motivating and engaging to their players. So let's look at how we can use some of those psychological hooks in the classroom. And really, when we're talking about gamification, there are basically 2 different types. There's structural gamification and content gamification. The first one, structural gamification, is what we think of when we think of gamification in the classroom. This is points, levels, badges, leaderboards, achievements. This is where you're building the structure of your course, but not really changing any of the content. So I'm going to show you a game that is almost entirely structural gamification. It has basically no content. It's called Cookie Clicker. And how you play Cookie Clicker is by clicking on this cookie on the left-hand side. That's how you bake cookies and how you gain points in the game. Now, the popularity of this game is not necessarily the content. It's all the wrapper around it. You can see that you get achievements, you get a point score. You can see that there's some mystery along the side of what's the next thing that I can buy with my cookies. So all of this is the wrapper around the content. Part of why people love this game is the incremental feedback that you're given. And that's really big in video games nowadays. Sure, we know that we're going to get to an end at some point, or we know that we're going to get to milestones. But we want to know that the little things that we're doing along the way are also important. So let me tell you about a structural gamification project that I had a lot to do with as an instructional designer at Colorado State University, Pueblo. The higher-ups came to us and they said, we need more instructors using our Blackboard learning management system. And we said, great, we have been trying to do that for years. We have been doing one-on-one seminars, group seminars throughout the semester. We've been making tutorial videos and instructional PDFs, and nothing had really been sticking. So we sat down and we thought about what would really help instructors learn this material. So we decided to come up with a self-paced training using Blackboard that would also be gamified. Now, we already had the content for this course. We basically created nothing for it. We had the videos, we had the instructional PDFs, we had all the links that we gave people to the articles. Really, we just needed a better wrapper that would propel our students, well, and in this case instructors, through the content. So what we did is we broke it up into 3 different skill sections that had modules within those skill sections. We had a beginner, an intermediate, and advanced. And part of the autonomy that we gave our users was that you could test out of any of these skill sections. You felt you were already past beginner level? Great, test out of that one, move on to intermediate. And actually, once you got to advanced, there was no linear progression. You could jump around to any topics that you wanted. It gave some autonomy to our class. Now, we also knew that we wanted to badge this course, but we knew the completion badges weren't going to cut it. Completion badges are where you finish a piece of content, you get a badge. Another piece of content, another badge. Content badge, content badge. The problem is, after a while, that is not very motivating. So what we decided to do was set up a two-tier badging system. We had basic badges and master badges. Now the basic badges were designed a little more simply, and you got those when you completed a module and scored at least 3 out of 5 on the quiz at the end. A master badge you got, though, when you scored 5 out of 5. Now that wasn't our only motivation with badges. We also had wording that went with it, and if you got a master badge, you were really congratulated in the wording. And if you got a basic badge, sure, you were going to get to move on to the next module, but we chided you a little. You wouldn't believe if you give instructors this type of wording, how many of them go back in and redo that quiz to try to get a 5 out of 5. Now another element of the course was that once you beat a skill section, you got a certificate. And if you had gotten all master badges throughout that skill section, you would get a master certificate. And if you just got any basic badges throughout there, you only got the basic certificate. Now another thing that really motivated people to want to try to get a master badge is that if you got a master badge, you got a point towards our leaderboards. Now before I go into our leaderboards and how we set those up, let's talk about leaderboards in general because they've changed a lot in video games. Let's look at a video game leaderboard, a classic one. And you can see how this leaderboard might not be very motivating, right? It's only motivating to me if I can get into that top 10. And for the average person playing this game, you're probably not going to be able to touch any of those scores. So you sort of shrug your shoulders, you look at it, and you move on. So let's look at how video game developers changed leaderboards when video games went online. Oh, they thought, great. Now I know every single person's score who's playing this game. I'm going to make a big worldwide leaderboard. And you can see how this is almost less motivating. I now know how terrible I am specifically at this game. So my username is Tryanemy, and I'm 9,005th in this game. The problem is that I don't really have any motivation to move up to 9,004th. Mostly because I don't know who Butt Monkey is or why I should care about beating him. So you can see we were still a ways away from getting truly engaging leaderboards. So let's look how a modern leaderboard works. You can see here I am, Tryanemy, 3rd on the list. But instead of pitting me against the entire world, it's only showing me against my friends, which is a lot more motivating. Because if I see that 16 Chars is ahead of me and I know that that's my buddy Adam from down the street, that's way more engaging for me to get back into that game and try to beat his score. And especially if he can send me a note like this that says, ha ha, suck it Ryan, I beat your time, that's even more motivating for me to get in. So let's see how it works in our leaderboards for our Blackboard online course. We decided to go with group leaderboards. And this is really popular to use when you have a large audience that you're trying to engage. So how we did this is anytime an instructor signed up for the course, we knew what college they were from within the university. The art college, the business school, the math and science, and we grouped them together. Now anytime they got a master badge in one of our modules, they get a point towards our leaderboards. So that really engaged them and motivated them to do well on the assignments so that they could get a point for their team. And it also helped with some recruitment because instructors would talk to other instructors within their college and say, hey, if you sign up for this course, then we can get higher in the leaderboards because I can't believe that the art department is beating us. So our experiment with gamification was a big success. We had a 10-fold increase in the people that took our course as opposed to any of our other engagement techniques that we'd done with Blackboard training. And when you looked at some of the surveys that we had people fill out at the end of each skill section, the gamification elements ranked really high. And these were not from people who were normally playing video games. These were 50, 60, 70-year-old instructors But these psychological elements that video games and gamification brought to the course really motivated them. So here's some resources and some web apps that you can use to get some structural gamification going in your course. You could start out small, or you can go big time. I would suggest talking with the instructional designer at your university or college to see how they can help implement some of these into your course. So let's talk about the second type of gamification, and that's content gamification. Now, content gamification is where you're going to change the content of your course by adding game thinking, game theory, and some of these game elements like story, characters, motivations, and mystery to your course. Now, one of the specific things with content gamification is that it takes a little bit more resources because you're actually changing the content. So usually this type of gamification is reserved for content that doesn't change that often. Beginning courses, introductory courses. Let me tell you about some of the content gamification that you might have heard of in the past. Things like Carmen Sandiego, right? Carmen Sandiego was teaching kids about geography, but it wrapped it in a storyline, wrapped it in a mystery, so that it became more palatable and fun for kids to learn about geography. Here's another example. This is a website called thedangersofracking.com. And really what it's talking about is just some different research and different ideas about how fracking works and how it could be dangerous. Now you can see that could easily just be a web page with a bunch of text. But how this website works is it gives you the story of this drop of water and about how it's transported and how it goes throughout your life. And you can see how that's a lot more interesting because instead of just basic facts, now I'm getting to see the story of this and I have some context for it. Another example of this is a game called The Typing of the Dead. Now this game came out in 1999, produced by Sega, and actually came out as an arcade game in Japan. And really all this is doing is teaching you how to type. Now the new version that came out in 2013, called Typing of the Dead Overkill, is on Steam right now, and it uses content gamification in a way that motivates people to do something that is normally pretty dry, like learning how to type, but it adds storyline, it adds characters, and it really makes the act of learning how to type fun and engaging. If you play through this entire game, it actually has a really great story that makes you want to progress. Now, the Center for Creative Leadership is also doing some of this content gamification. They're partnering with Triad Interactive Media on a project around these lines. This is Farplane, and it's an online adventure game designed around our own highly researched and proven boundary-spanning leadership practices. But instead of just showing or telling people the concept involved in the leadership model, people build alliances within this game, they analyze character motivations, they navigate complex political environments, and that's all while learning those skills that help them succeed in today's workplace. A big part of content gamification and what makes it so successful is that humans in general are storytellers. And the more that you wrap learning up in a context or a narrative, the more powerful it is for people. The more they can relate to that information, and the more that it sticks in their long-term memory. I'm excited that the Center for Creative Leadership has taken on this gamification project. They know that gamification can be really powerful in teaching and learning, and especially in leadership development. So let me tell you about another content gamification course that I had a lot to do with as an instructional designer at Colorado State University, Pueblo. And that was the Intro to HTML course, or Web Design 232. And this was not a very popular course. It had low grades, it had a big dropout rate, the evaluations for instructors and the course were pretty low. And so we got a new instructor in to teach the course. And he came to us and said, what can I do to make this more engaging? So we decided to add some content gamification and wrap his course in a fantasy theme. We had our adventurer here, and he was going off to Code Mountain on an adventure. And it had some of the fantasy themes, like far off places and dangerous monsters. I really like this course because I got to do a lot of cool art for it. We also had some structural gamification. We had achievements and badges, a point system, and one thing that we had to do was change some of the content of his course. Now, I don't want you to think that we had to strip all of his assignments down to nothing and start them from scratch. Nope, it was more about tweaking those assignments. And let me give you an example. If you've ever taken a beginning HTML course, you basically know that the first assignment is always going to be a Hello World webpage. And that's really just teaching you the basic syntax of HTML, adding some headers, things like that. So instead of Hello World, we did a Goodbye World as the assignment for our letter home to our parents, saying we're going to be going off on this grand adventure. So you can see just a little tweak. Another example of us tweaking an assignment is when the students needed to add images and resize them within a web page. Now, instead of just giving them a random assortment of images, we gave them very specific images that, if sized and placed correctly, would show the map to the next area. You can see these are not big changes to any of the assignments. They're just small tweaks that add a storyline, add some characters, add some development and mystery to the course that made it more exciting. And it worked. This course got much higher marks in the evaluations. Students got higher grades, and less of them dropped out. And while we did have to put a lot of work into this course at the beginning, you can see how we could use this course over and over again to get that same engagement. HTML doesn't change much, especially the intro stuff. Now, I wish there was a way that we could add content gamification to our courses that was an easy way with some web app or something like the structural gamification was, but there's not really. I would suggest that maybe you just start small, take a couple assignments, add a storyline through them, and go from there. Or you can talk to an instructional designer at your college or university and see what they have to say. I'm sure they would love to help you with something interesting like content gamification. So to sum things up, I think we have a lot to learn from video games and video game developers in the areas of engagement and motivation. In the last 20 years, video games have gone from a toy that children and nerds played with to one of the most dominant forms of entertainment on the planet. They cross the boundaries of race, of age, of socioeconomic and geographic locations. And it's not by accident, and it's not because just they're readily available. It's because a lot of really smart people developed and utilized a lot of really new tools to engage and motivate their player base. And it's something that we as educators can use in our own courses. And we should be using those in our courses. We are in the business of engagement. So whether you have a small class or a really large class, an online class, or a mix of all of those three, let's use these engagement techniques that video game developers have honed and made billions on over the last 5 or 6 years so that we can appeal to students on a base level and not leave this engagement time on the table to be taken up by clicking cookies. I'm going to switch over to one last slide at the end of this just so that you can reference some of the web apps and resources that I've talked about in this lecture. And I'm also going to add my gamer tag at the bottom and my URL if you'd like to contact me further about gamification or you just want to play some games. Thanks.